Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. In this episode, recorded on September 25th, 2014, Daniel and I spoke with Dr. Mary Ruwart about the current state of the Libertarian Party and the role of the non-aggression principle in the Libertarian Party. Dr. Ruwart is a research scientist, ethicist, and libertarian author and activist. She sought the Libertarian Party's presidential nomination in 1984 and 2008, and the Libertarian Party's vice presidential nomination in 1992. She is the author of Healing Our World and Short Answers to the Tough Questions. You can follow her work at ruwart.com. That's RUWART.com. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/LP.
First, just tell us a little bit about your background in the Libertarian Party and how did you get started with the Libertarian Party and just more about your background in general.
Well, I read Atlas Shrugged when I was in college, and basically at that point in time, I became what is now known as a libertarian because I had adopted the non-aggression principle. But it wasn't until the early 80s that I actually found an active branch of the party in my locale. I think I actually joined the party before then through an ad in Reason magazine. Didn't hear anything back. But then there was an advertisement for a Libertarian Party meeting in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where I was at the time. I went there, and I really learned a lot because the woman who ran the group, Cheryl Laux, was extremely well educated in libertarian principles. We used the ISIL brochures and the Nathaniel Brandon records as our discussion basis. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ISIL, it's the International Society for Individual Liberty at ISIL.org. And in all fairness, I should say I'm now the chair of that organization, at least temporarily. And I then was encouraged by Cheryl to run for office. I think it was county commissioner. And she told me, all you need to do is be a paper candidate. They don't have any debates for this office. Well, as it turned out, they did things differently that time, and they had debates. So I had trial by fire as a libertarian candidate, but I was well prepared because of her help and instruction. I then went on to the National Convention, which was held in 1983, to select a presidential candidate. And the one that we had Gene Burns, who was basically the front runner and well accepted, he would be our candidate. He dropped out about a week before the convention. So there was a lot of things going on at the convention. And Roger Gary from Texas met me at a Texas cocktail hour, I guess it was. And he told me that if I wanted to make a point, I needed to actually run for president. Now, the point I wanted to make, because I was naive and young, is that the press would pay attention to our presidential candidate if it was a woman. I wasn't suggesting it should be me necessarily, and I wasn't suggesting it for this particular 1984 presidential run. I was actually suggesting it for 4 years from now because all the front runners were men. So I threw my hat into the ring with Roger's help, and we surprisingly did very well. The two front runners, Ed Ravenel and David Berglund, each got 40% of the vote, and I got 20% of the vote. So I was courted by the two front runners and learned a lot about how the Libertarian Party operates. And I was a little discouraged because I felt we did not honor the non-aggression principle in our dealing with each other. So I spent the next few national conventions promoting unity campaigns with Roger Gary. And that went pretty well. I also ran for office many times during the next few years. And eventually I had, I guess you would say it, if you were religious, you would call it a revelation. If you were not religious, you might call it something else. But basically I had a moment when I recognize that the ends and means are intimately related. And if we wanted to have a peaceful and prosperous world, we needed to actually practice the non-aggression principle, not only among ourselves, but in the world. And with this insight came the book Healing Our World, which is what I am probably most well known for in the libertarian movement. Following that, after giving a talk about how to answer tough questions in a soundbite type way, Sharon Harris of the Advocates for Self-Government, that website is theadvocates.org, asked me to have a column with the advocates that would answer these tough questions. And so I did that for about 15 years, and that became my next book, Short Answers to the Tough Questions. I did run in 2008 for the presidential nomination again against Bob Barr because I felt he wasn't the right candidate for us, and have been on the Libertarian National Committee several times. I've also served on the board of Heartland, Michigan, and of course, as I mentioned, the International Society for Individual Liberty, and also FIJA, the Fully Informed Jury Amendment Organization, FIJA.org. So that's, and I think, encapsulates most of what I've done in the Libertarian Party. So I hope that acquaints your listeners with who I am.
Okay, so you said at one point that during your campaign you felt like some libertarians weren't honoring the non-aggression principle. What do you mean by that? What disturbed you during your campaign?
Well, I thought libertarians would be different, and they would keep their word to each other, and things like that. And that didn't happen. There was as much infighting and dirty tricks, I guess I should say, at the 1983 convention as I would have expected at other conventions. Somehow I thought we would be honest and forthright. And actually the biggest criticism I received was that I wasn't nasty enough to the other candidates. But it was hard to be nasty to them because they were my colleagues fighting for liberty, right? So even though I might disagree with them on something, I tried to do it in a respectful way because I did respect them. Both of the candidates were very, they were well known in the movement and they had done a lot. So, of course, I certainly didn't want to insult them. But that was the expectation at that point in time. I'm glad to say that I think we've, at least to some extent, have changed.
Now, looking to the present day, it seems like there are some people within the Libertarian Party who have stopped promoting the non-aggression principle at all. They're trying to make libertarianism sort of a combination of different things that perhaps it's not. So what place would you like to see for the non-aggression principle as the Libertarian Party tries to brand itself to the outside?
I'm glad you asked that question. That's a great question. And I feel, as you do, that, we have candidates running for office that don't even, as far as I can tell, know what the non-aggression principle is. And that's just not who, in my opinion, who we are. And if we want to distinguish ourselves on the political landscape, we need to go back to promoting the non-aggression principle, because that's what got everyone so excited in the early years of the party. An incredible amount of work, time, and money went into getting us on the ballot, and still does. But back then, we didn't even have an office. The office was out of someone's home. And yet, look at what we did. I mean, we ran a fairly effective presidential campaign every 4 years and ran candidates and won some local elections. I mean, that's incredible. And we did a lot of other things too. We actually worked well at the local level, rolling back taxes, regulation, eminent domain. We can talk about that a little bit because that's actually what we do well. The system is rigged to keep us from winning office. And so of course we don't do that well, and probably never will unless we become a second party. But getting back to your question, I think this emphasis on winning an election has taken over our soul, so to speak, and we've let the non-aggression principle kind of slide into the background, and sometimes worse than that, not even be part of our platform. And that is going to destroy us. We will not get the excitement and the passion that has kept the party going if we continue down that route.
So, how would you say the state of the Libertarian Party is today? Just aside from that, just in general.
I think the party is having trouble because, first of all, it's not attracting the excitement without the non-aggression principle. I think there are some things that are being done right, but I think our strength and our ability to be the Ghostbusters, shall we say, when big government comes knocking, is the ability to change things at the local level. We do that extremely well. Let me give you an example. I ran for city commission in 1983 with a slate of other candidates. And even though we didn't win, we actually beat out two other, we didn't beat the establishment candidates who were already elected, but we beat out the other two slates that were also running. And we got a lot of, we spoke libertarian principles, the non-aggression principle. Everybody knew what libertarians stood for if they had listened to us. So when the city tried to do an eminent domain grab, I had an elderly gentleman come up to me in one of the meetings and say, he actually, before he said anything, he put $200 in cash in my hand. That was a lot of money back in 83. And he said, Dr. Ruwart, I know that your employer, the Upjohn Company, is going to benefit from this eminent domain grab. But Dr. Ruwart, I know you're on my side because you are a libertarian. And so please take this money and fight for me because they're trying to take the bicycle shop that my brother and I built up over the years. Please help. And of course, the libertarians did, and we helped roll back that eminent domain. So that's the power of the non-aggression principle. People knew what we stood for, and they trusted us. And they handed us money without conditions in some cases. And they were very, I would say that they considered us their hero and heroines. And that's what the Libertarian Party can be to the general public, to the people who are squashed by big government. And actually, the Libertarian Institute for Justice, which is a libertarian legal foundation, ij.org, that's what they do. They go to people who've been oppressed by big government. And eminent domain is one of their big issues. And they take their cases pro bono and take them all the way to the Supreme Court. So this is a very popular thing, and the Libertarian Party is perfectly poised to do that. We're organized so well at the local level that we can do things like this, and this is where we could really be the Ghostbusters for those who have big government knocking at their door.
So what role should and can the Libertarian Party play on the national and state levels?
Well, actually, this works at the national and state levels, too. If you recall, Steve Cubby back in 1996 organized, and he was a prominent libertarian. I think he is the first medical marijuana patient. He organized, along with some other people, the Proposition 215, which legalized marijuana in California. It was the first bill of its kind. And, that has spread across the country. So now we have a couple of states that even have totally decriminalized marijuana. And also, Carol Ann Rand I think it was in 2004, defeated Bob Barr, a sitting congressman, in the primaries by running an advertisement with a medical marijuana patient, a multiple sclerosis patient in her hospital bed, saying, Bob Barr wants to take my medicine away. Why do you want to do that, Bob? And it was an incredibly effective ad. And, here a sitting congressman was defeated in his own primary, mostly because he just looked so bad when that happened. And nationally, Libertarians defeated Clinton Care in 1993. I don't know, that's not normally recognized or celebrated, but I was part of the group of libertarians that was fighting that. And whenever I saw essays in the Wall Street Journal or any other place, I often recognize the name. About 80% of the time, I recognize the person as a member of the libertarian movement. So we were quite effective there. We went on the radio. I think we did over hundreds of radio shows and things of this nature. And certainly we had the Libertarian Foundations coming forward with a lot of material. And that material was actually so effective that when we had to fight Obamacare, much of that material was already in the public domain and used by a lot of the people who were against it, even if they weren't libertarians. So that was very effective too.
Give us a little more insight into your book, Healing Our World. You talked about it a little bit, but tell us a little bit more.
Well, I think it still is probably the most comprehensive book on the effect of liberty in the real world. It has over 1,000 references so that candidates and people who want to understand the libertarian philosophy better can see that it's not just theory. The other aspect of Healing Our World, which is different than other libertarian books, is instead of talking to conservatives, it really speaks to liberals, environmentalists, New Agers, and Christians. And I don't even use the word rights in Healing Our World. I simply take people through the non-aggression principle as something that's familiar to them, that they use every day in their one-to-one interactions with other people, and try to educate them about almost the hypnosis that we have when we deal with people group to group through politics, and basically throw the non-aggression principle out the window. And by having these examples of how liberty works in the real world, I hope to show that it's not just pie in the sky theory. It actually works in the real world to give us what we've always wanted: universal peace and plenty.
Now, you mentioned these things not the non-aggression principle often not being applied politically, and as we touched on a little bit earlier, that's sometimes the case even within the Libertarian Party. So how now you suggested this is because people think it can help Libertarian Party candidates win elections, but how has it developed to where Bob Barr, who you just mentioned, being defeated because he didn't support medical marijuana, how did it develop to the point where then he became the Libertarian Party presidential nominee?
Well, we've always had a division in the party about people who think the party is there to win elections and people who think the party is there to win hearts and minds. And the people who want to win elections increasingly feel, I believe, that they pretty much should do anything they need to win those elections so that then they can bring liberty to everybody else. Well, I don't think it works that way. I mean, we had a libertarian in Congress, Ron Paul, even though he was sitting as a Republican. He was libertarian by philosophy.
Right.
And, I'm a big fan of Ron Paul. He's been a supporter of mine. I've been a supporter of his. But, he was not able to roll back big government. He could alert us when some horrible bill like the Patriot Act was coming down, but he wasn't able to roll back big government. But what he was able to do was win hearts and minds. And if you are able to do that, eventually people will refuse to elect anyone except those who have their hearts and minds in the right place. That's how you bring change about. Trying to break the non-aggression principle and throwing it out the window in order to win elections is just going to defeat your own purpose. First of all, I don't believe it will work. And even if it does work, by the time it does, in doing those things against the non-aggression principle, you will have lost your libertarian soul and won't be able to make the right decisions. Politics is a tough game. You have to really be strong in your moral commitment to withstand the pressures, because there is a lot of temptation there. And that's true That's true running as a libertarian or running as a Republican or Democrat. There's a lot of temptation out there. And if you haven't already been practicing the non-aggression principle, it's going to be tough not to be deceitful and greedy and everything else when you get to office.
So now we have a couple of policies that we'd like to discuss with you, specific policies. And I'll list them out for you because we have a few of them, but I don't think we have enough time to hit all of them. So you can pick one and tell us which one you'd like to discuss with us the most. So we have the fair tax and foreign policy. Which one would you like to discuss a little more about?
Well, I could just say very briefly that there's no such thing as a fair tax if you believe in the principle, and dispose of that one very quickly. Now, as far as foreign policy, we have really, if you believe in karma, we've really created some bad stuff for ourselves. We've been blessed to be the most prosperous nation on earth. And a great deal of that, of course, most of it is because of our libertarian heritage. But, we were lucky establishing ourselves as a country to some extent. The American Revolution could have gone wrong in a number of times. So we have this incredible gift. And what we've done is taken that prosperity and gone into nations that are not so prosperous and really destroyed them. And we've been doing this for many, many years, way before 9/11. We did this in Central America. We did that in the Middle East. In fact, we've caused a lot of the trauma in the Middle East. We are the ones who I would say almost established Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden by giving them this foreign aid when they were our friends, and then turning them into these rabid dogs and then wondering why they turn on us. It's crazy. You don't fund somebody who is doing bad things and expect that good things are going to come for you. And this is getting back to what we meant by bad means. You don't want to incite war, and yet that's exactly what we've done. And I traveled in the 70s, and everyone was happy to see Americans overseas. When you travel now, you're almost ashamed to tell them you're American because a lot of people hate us for what we've done. So this is a big change, a big shift in the way we've been perceived in the world, and someday that's going to come back to bite us.
Right, and we're seeing what's happening with ISIS right now as largely, if not entirely, being a creation of American policy as well. But the reason that we specifically mentioned the taxation issue and the foreign policy issue is because these are areas where it could be said that the Libertarian Party perhaps most of all has strayed from following the non-aggression principle. So what would you like to see the Libertarian Party do moving forward to get back to applying the non-aggression principle in those areas?
Well, I think we need to embrace the non-aggression principle, and of course that means not supporting taxes of any kind. I think Harry Browne did an excellent job in presenting a way to encourage people to think about how their life would be without income tax, for example. And we didn't have income tax really until the early 1900s. In fact, most people didn't have income tax till after World War II. So it's something we could easily do. And unfortunately, I think at this point in time, the Libertarian Party membership is so heavily into this idea of winning at all costs that if you present it that way, they'll say, no, we don't believe in winning at all costs. But if you look at actions, which is the way to really see what people believe, I think that you see that is in fact the case. So that needs to change. How it can change, the only thing I know, well, I'm maybe not a good predictor of how the future will unfold. But I think it's possible that the young people being activated today by Ron Paul and by other exciting things happening on the internet, they may infiltrate at some point, but I think to a large extent, we've lost that opportunity. That was one of the big opportunities, I think, that we lost when Bob Barr and Ron Paul became estranged in the 2004 campaign. And they've gone over to the Republicans. So maybe what will happen, what will happen is the Republicans will be taken over by Libertarians, and Libertarian Party might be taken over by Republicans, but we'll have the problem of the wasted vote syndrome, and it will be liberty that triumphs. So maybe everything is unfolding as it should. It's kind of hard to tell without the benefit of hindsight.
Definitely. Where can people follow some more of your work?
They can get a lot of free information at my website, ruwart.com. That's RUWART.com. I have a free library there, and if they sign up for that, they can access all kinds of great things, including excerpts from my book, and actually the entire 1992 version of Healing Our World. So for those who want to get a flavor of Healing Our World, but maybe can't afford at this point the book because they're students or whatever, they can actually go and enjoy the initial edition, and then later, if they want more detail for their political run, so to speak, they can go ahead and access the 2003 edition there. Incidentally, there'll be another edition next year, and that one will also be updated. There's a lot of short answers on my website, so I really encourage people to take a look.
Well, very good. Obviously, there are some topics that we didn't get to today that I know you have a lot to say about. Like the FDA and healthcare and some of the areas that more of your professional background perhaps is in. But I feel like we covered a lot of ground, so thank you for joining us today, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
Sure, I'd like that. And thank you for having me, and I hope your listeners have enjoyed.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes or subscribe on Stitcher. And check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.